Okay, welcome to this video on repetition, commonly known as loops. So in terms of how we control and flow our program, we have two main ways that we can do that. One is branching using if statements, and the other is repetition, which is using loops. Just now we're going to talk about repetition. So this is when sometimes you want to do an action or repeat a bit of code that does something. And, typing it out is laborious, it's not scalable. Often you just don't have the information to print it all out. So examples of that might be that you want to print out each name in a list, or you want to take a bunch of names and print out only all the first names. You might want to, every time you have a transaction in your bank, recalculate the bank balance. So that code for recalculating the balance happens repeatedly. Transactions happen repeatedly. And there are two types of loops that we're going to look at in this module. There are other types, but we're going to focus on these two. So we're going to have a while loop and a for loop. So a while loop allows you to use this logical checking where if this condition is true, just keep repeating that code as long as that thing is true. So a while loop can, run on forever. A for loop allows you to specify how many times that loop will run. So if you know how many times, you say for everything in the range between these two numbers, then repeat the code that many times. So let's start with while loops. So this code that I have here, I set an initial variable to 0, and it's convention that you would just use I for counters. So things that count or auto increment, you would use I. It means your program will be understood by other people. You could use anything. I'll continue using I just for convention. And then I have while I is less than 3, which it currently is because it's 0. So this bit here would be true. I'm going to print that out. And then I'm going to do I plus equals 1. So that's a compound operator. It's the same as saying I becomes I plus 1. It's a way of incrementing 1. So how do I count through a loop? Let's have a look to see, because I want to know what value is currently within my variable I, and then I want to figure out what goes on to the console. So I know that what's going to come out the console is 0, 1, 2, but how did I know that? So the first thing I've done is I've set I to be 0. I know that 0 is less than 3, and so I've printed out I, and then I increments by 1, so I is 1. I go back to the top of my loop. Is 1 less than 3? Yes. So print my current value of I out into the console, so that's 1. Increment by 1, I becomes 2. Is 2 less than 3? Yes, so print that out into the console. Increment by 1, and this is where the fun starts. Is 3 less than 3? No, so I'm going to skip out of the while loop and continue with whatever code is underneath here. That is my loop finished. So let's take a different example here. I've got I is 7. While I is less than 10, print out the value of I, and then this time, rather than increment by 2, rather than increment by 1, I'm going to increment by 2. So this is what I should see in the console. I should see 7 and 9. But why? So again, let's walk through. I is 7. 7 is less than 10. true, so print out. Increment it by 2 gets me to 9. Is 9 less than 10? True, print it out. Increment by 2 gets me to 11. 11 is less than 10 is not true, and so my loop ends. And then another example, a final example for a while loop. I have I is 99, while I is less than 10, print out I and increment by 1. But nothing appears in my console. So why is that? Well, I've set to 99, and my very first condition here, 99 is not less than 10, so the loop ends. So this condition here is really important because that's what's determining whether or not I'm going to go into that loop or whether I'm just going to skip over the top of it and go to the next section of code. In this case, there's no error, but nothing appears in the console, so sometimes it's easy to get confused when you're expecting to see something and it isn't. So that's why this exercise of just jotting down on a bit of paper what's currently in I, what do I think my variables currently are, and you can print them out to the console just to double check. I could print out just before my while loop, print out what I is, and then I can see, oh, actually it's 99, something's gone wrong here. But it's not a syntax error. It's the Python development environment is not going to tell me something is wrong here. It's a logical error, and these are the harder ones to find. So anything you can do in terms of kind of developing your process of keeping note of things on bits of paper, being able to work through loops and what values are in which variables, that's going to help you find issues like this, why something didn't print when you expected that it might. Okay, the other type of loop then is a for loop. So how does a for loop work? A for loop has a start position, in this case it's 2, and it has an exit point for the loop. So the loop will start at 2 and increase to 5, but it exits at that point. The loop doesn't run. It doesn't include 5. That's the tricky bit to remember. So what I've got here is for I, so again a counter called I, in the range from 2 to 5, print me out the value of I. And so I go through 2 to 5, I auto increment by 1, it's printing out into the console, but not number 5. I don't include the last item in that. That's my exit point for the loop. So let's walk through that like we did before. I have a variable I and I have something in the console. So I have 2 because that's my start position. I've set I to my start position of 2 and then I just want to print out I, so my console says 2. I increment by 1 automatically. 3, that's still within my range of 2 to 5, so I print it. I increment, I go to 4, still within my range of 2 to 5, I print it. I go to 5, that's my exit point, so I don't print. It's my final number, so the loop ends, and I move on to the next section of code. So in this case, I have got a start and an end position in my for loop. I can write a for loop where I only specify one number. So if you only have one number in there, then that's going to be my exit, my end point. It's going to assume that the range is from 0 to that number. If you only have one number, we assume that it's going to start at 0. And then the loop will exit at 2. So I'll walk through again. I start at 0 and I print it out. I increment automatically by 1, same as before. So my range is my I value is 1, print that out, and then I get to 2, and the final number in the range isn't included. That's my exit point. I'm out of the loop. I can also have 3 numbers in my for loop. So the first two, we know what they are. They are my start and my exit position. But the third one, previously we were automatically auto-incrementing that loop by 1. I can overwrite that by putting a third number in here, they're called parameters. So I can put a third parameter in, and that's going to be my increment. So how many am I going to add by each time? So we've made that 2. So in this case, what appears in the console is only the numbers 2 and 4. So let's see why that happens. I've got my I value of 2, because that's my start point. It's within my range of 2 to 5, so I'm going to print it out to the console. Then I'm going to increment by 2 this time, because that's what's in that third parameter spot there is the number 2, so that makes 4. Then I can print that out, because I'm still within my range of 2 to 5. Goes on to the console. Then I increment by 2, which is 6. So I've gone beyond my loop exit now. So my loop is finished, and I move out. So previously, these for loops, we've seen that we specify a range, that we can specify how many times we want something to happen. If you already have a structure set up, so in this case I have a list of cities, it will let you basically loop through that using the index within the list without you needing to specify that. So if you know that you want to go through every single item in a list, you can have something slightly simplified. So you can say for X, which is an item in the list, for X items in the list, then that range is defined by how many items are already there. We're going to increment by 1, same as before. But in this case, what will happen is it says for all items in the list, print it out. And so I've printed out Aberdeen, Dundee, Edinburgh. So if you have a structure, this is a slightly simpler way of doing it. You can still use an index, a range if you want to, and then use that I value to access something by index. But this is a simpler, more efficient way of doing it.